What would happen if one of your grenades gets shot? For many years now, grenades have been essential in a soldier's equipment. They have not stopped evolving since they became widespread in World War I, and therefore there are many types of grenades. Today we will see what would happen if each of these is shot, and how the effect changes depending on the individual characteristics of these. We will also see if it would be deadly in the event that a soldier carried them, and if these would manage to be detonated. Let's start with stun grenades or flashbangs. These are mostly used by police forces to seriously degrade the combat effectiveness of potential threats. One of the most popular stun grenades in the world are the 1084, which when exploded produce a flash of between 6 and 8 million candelas and a sound of between 170 and 180 decibels. In other words, they produce a flash of approximately 50,000 light bulbs and a sound equivalent to that of a jet plane taking off. Its load consists of approximately 4.5 grams of a metallic pyrotechnic mixture, magnesium or aluminum oxidizer, along with a reactant like ammonium perchlorate or potassium perchlorate. The 1084 has a fairly simple operation similar to other grenades. This, when removed, the safeties start a delay fuse, and subsequently a fuse that heats the magnesium mixture and initiates the explosion of the chemicals in the main charge. When these are fully mixed, they explode violently, causing the flash. What would happen if one of these grenades gets shot? These grenades only have a minimal metal layer that is basically a sheet metal container where the chemical components are. And it also has a thick layer of steel that is to contain the explosion, to only let out light and sound. Believe it or not, this outer layer is quite thick, being able to effectively contain the magnesium explosion and remain intact. A low-caliber shot would only break it, preventing the projectile from passing. But an intermediate ammunition would undoubtedly penetrate the steel tube without problems. Magnesium is quite volatile when exposed to high temperatures and pressure. Easily, an intermediate ammunition could start the magnesium mixture inside a grenade without lethal consequences for the poor soldier who has it on his chest. Since most of the explosion is contained within the grenade, he would only suffer some burns and, of course, the effects of the grenade. Now let's continue with the smoke grenades. These are generally a metal tube with holes up and down and use an ignition device similar to the other grenades, only that its operation is through an initiator mixture that, in the case of smoke grenades, to prevent visibility, they burn a mixture of terephthalic acid and phosphorus. A projectile could easily penetrate metal containers and burn part of the mixture irregularly. It will only generate smoke normally if the projectile manages to burn the initiator mixture that is on the top, obviously without lethal consequences for the soldier carrying it, although smoke grenades usually heat up quite a bit while the chemical reaction is occurring. Now, one of the most interesting, the incendiary grenades. There are many types of incendiary grenades, but I would like to focus on thermite and white phosphorus ones. Incendiary grenades usually have an ignition mechanism very similar to gas grenades. They are basically the same but with different chemical components. Particularly thermite ones have a compound of aluminum and metal oxide, which produces an aluminothermic reaction known as thermite reaction. This material burns at 3,000 degrees Celsius. For perspective, the surface of the sun is at 5,000 degrees Celsius, so thermite burns at almost half the temperature of the sun. Thermite was used in World War II by Allied forces, mostly to destroy their own military equipment if it was going to be captured, or to destroy German military equipment, such as their captured artillery pieces. It was also used in cluster bombs, which were absurdly effective. Thanks to its temperature, it literally liquefied steel, making it practically a liquid. If a thermite grenade is shot, in most cases, nothing will happen. Thermite grenades have a really high ignition temperature, so the gunpowder or nitrocellulose used in other grenades can't ignite the thermite. Only its ignition mechanism can achieve the grenade's ignition. Some of these mechanisms use magnesium strips, a material used in flashbang grenades. Others use a combination of glycerin and potassium permanganate. The only way for a projectile to ignite a thermite grenade is to hit the ignition mechanism, causing it to ignite. In the case of grenades ignited by white phosphorus, the situation changes radically. This has two effects. It creates smoke screens much faster than conventional smoke grenades, and also has anti-personnel effects as it causes severe burns. It was very popular in the Vietnam and Gulf Wars. This uses only one detonator that, when it explodes, exposes the grenade to oxygen and significant heat, igniting the white phosphorus substance. This, contrary to thermite, is very volatile. White phosphorus just starts to burn when exposed to air. This reaches temperatures of 550 degrees Celsius and is extremely lethal on contact. A shot that merely penetrates the structure of the grenade will definitely detonate it. Either of these two incendiary grenades, in the event of detonating in a soldier's chest, would undoubtedly finish him off in a very brutal and painful way. Fragmentation grenades are simpler, and their effect is much more predictable. These are the most common in the world. The most popular might be the 1000 K2 grenades from World War II and their successors, the 1067s. They are designed to produce shrapnel from hard plastic, steel, barbed wire, metal spheres, or even with their own casing to eliminate the enemy. Their action is simple. When the safeties are removed, the hammer strikes a primer, activating the delay fuse that, when it reaches the end, initiates the detonation of the powder inside, causing the body to collapse and fragment into thousands of pieces that fly in all directions after the explosion. Its lethal range is usually 20 meters, but the shrapnel can exceed 100 meters in distance. Believe it or not, the casing of fragmentation grenades tends to be quite thick, being able to contain much of the explosion. However, these would be easily penetrated by an intermediate projectile. If an intermediate projectile hits it, it would undoubtedly detonate the powder inside or the explosive it has within. Modern grenades generally use the explosive composition B, a fairly stable mix of trinitrotoluene and research department explosive that in theory can withstand great disturbances, pressure, and heat. But there are many videos on the internet where they prove that it can be detonated with a 5.56 by 45 NATO shot without problems. Also, concussion grenades would have many problems with direct shots. Concussion grenades, like the German 1024 or the American 1000 Ka-3 from World War II, use the same action mechanism as fragmentation grenades. But instead of having a thick body to produce shrapnel, these have a really thin body to not contain the explosion, and they also usually have a lot of explosive to produce a much larger explosion. These are extremely susceptible to explosions. In fact, it was very common for the Allies to use them as conventional explosives for demolition or to use against armored vehicles. In fact, the Germans made super grenades, which they called concentrated charge, which were basically 6 stickless grenades attached to another with its ignition system intact. These were used to destroy enemy armored vehicles. These grenades were particularly weaker than fragmentation ones because their casing is thinner. This is to prevent containing the explosion that occurs inside. A rifle shot, even from a pistol, could detonate these grenades, of course, depending on their model. Needless to say how dangerous it would be for one of these to explode on a soldier's chest. Particularly fragmentation ones would be less dangerous than concussion ones, because the explosion from fragmentation grenades are minimal, as their body absorbs most of the explosion. The most dangerous thing would be the large amount of shrapnel it ejects. But if the soldier has his ceramic protection vest or Kevlar, he could perfectly withstand most of the shrapnel. There are cases of soldiers who have jumped on fragmentation grenades and have survived. However, if the grenade that explodes on the soldier's body is a concussion one, this would be the end of the soldier. The shock waves released at that distance would be completely lethal. So it's dangerous to carry grenades. It's partly dangerous, but only in the case that a shot hits the grenade. The way to carry grenades is very varied, but they are generally kept on the side of the waist, on the chest, or even the back, all depending on the paradigm of the army in question. But generally, grenades are in places where it is unlikely to get shot. Or in case these grenades get shot, they are in a place where they would not receive much damage, like in the bulletproof vest. Since the decade of 2010, the use of Composition B is being replaced by the much more stable explosive IMX-101, which is already being used in artillery ammunition and in grenades that are in fact being used in the current Ukrainian conflict. Now, fragmentation grenades require very precise ignition to explode. Therefore, they are much safer, and this problem should no longer be a threat.